redid the timeline. Hopefully that might make a little bit more sense. It's a little neater. I came down here and spent a little time on Monday doing that, thinking if I'm not feeling rushed to get through something in class, maybe I can make my lines a little straighter, maybe make the numbers a little bit neater. So the dates in red are the ones I really want you to remember, okay? The other dates are good too, but I really want you to remember the dates in red, not only for the book of Jeremiah, but for all of your Old Testament study. Those dates in red are going to be really important. Okay, I hope your fingers are warmed up, because we got lots of Bible to look at tonight, lots of passages to turn to, but fortunately they're all within like 4 pages, so we don't have to turn far. If you had your material ahead of time and you were able to look through it, we're talking about Judah's spiritual condition. And we've already had some things to say about this in our earlier classes. They were wicked, they were sinful, that's why God was bringing judgment upon them. But tonight we're going to delve a little bit deeper into that and get a little bit more specific into what exactly it was that they were doing, but also what was their attitude towards it. So the first question that I had in your material was, how pervasive was the sin of Judah? And I gave you some verses from, all the verses tonight, most all of the verses, are anywhere from chapter 2 to chapter 7, somewhere in between there. And this would be messages that Jeremiah preached during the reign of Josiah, all right? So we're talking between 627 and 609 when Josiah died. We're talking about that time frame. Josiah is the king in these messages, though. So while Josiah is trying to bring about great reforms, Jeremiah tells us that despite Josiah's efforts, sin was pervasive. So what are some of the expressions that Jeremiah uses in these verses that I gave you? If you looked them up, what did you write down the things that Jeremiah says?
Abraham, that you can only search the streets if you could find one righteous.
Yeah, okay, so Jeremiah 5 and verse 1. Roam to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem. Look now and take note and seek in her open squares if you can find a man, if there is one who does justice, who seeks truth, then I will pardon her. And Brittany says it's like Abraham when he was talking with God about Sodom. Lord, will you destroy the city if there's 50 righteous people in it? No, I won't. Well, what about 40 people? And what about 30 people? And all the way down to 10, I think it was, or 5. Would you destroy it if I can just find 10 good people in Sodom? And God says, no, I won't do it if you can find that many. But God knows that you can't. So the same thing here. Go throughout the streets of Jerusalem, see if you can find someone who is righteous. And the implication here is that no one would be found. Now, of course, this is hyperbole. Obviously, Jeremiah is there. Baruch is there. Josiah is there. There are some who are righteous people. But the implication is that Jeremiah would struggle to find someone who was righteous. Chapter 6 and verse 13. From the least of them even to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for gain. So from the least people in the land to the greatest people. And you could look at that a few different ways. From the least and greatest in terms of importance, the people who don't matter, all the way up to the people who do matter, the people who are the least in age, all the way up to those who are the greatest in age, the people who are the least and the greatest in influence. There might be different ways you could look at that, but the point is, from the small nobodies to the great somebodies, everybody is greedy for gain. Everyone is given to covetousness. But also notice in verse 13, from the prophet even to the priest, everyone deals falsely. Even the supposed religious leaders are guilty of deceit and lies. In chapter 8 and verse 10, this one almost outside our range of verses tonight. But notice in chapter 8 and verse 10, you see similar language. From the least, this is middle of verse 10, from the least even to the greatest, everyone is greedy for gain. From the prophet even to the priest, everyone practiced it. That's virtually a word for word, what we just read in chapter 6 and verse 13. Chapter 7, verses 17 and 18. I've read this so many times, but for some reason this stuck out to me a little bit more now than it has before. Chapter 7, verse 17. Do you not see what they are doing in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods in order to spite me. Who all is involved in this false religion and this idolatry? Everybody, even the children, are participating in this. The children are going out and gathering wood, gathering sticks, so that they can offer these sacrifices as their parents are leading them in this way. The sin of Judah is pervasive everywhere. It is throughout society. So what were the things that led to this? What were the reasons as to why these things had happened? Why was it so pervasive? In chapter 2, 4, 5, and 6, there are some verses that I gave you in the material. And if you looked at those verses, there were some words that I hope stuck out to you as you read through it. Look at chapter 2 and verse 19. Chapter 2, verse 19. Your own wickedness will correct you, and your apostasies will reprove you. Know therefore and see that it is evil and bitter for you to forsake the Lord your God, and the dread of me, or fear of me, is not in you, says the Lord God of hosts. Are there some words in that verse that stick out to you?
Wickedness.
All right?
Backslide.
What would you say? Backsliding? Was that in the verse I just read?
Not yours, but ours. No.
Oh, okay. So I switched Bibles tonight. Is it the CSB that has backsliding? New King James. Okay, all right. Backsliding. That's one of those words that when you say it, you know what the definition is. All right. What about this? Forsake. You see that? How about the word fear? Really, the lack of fear for God. The fear of me is not in you. Look at chapter 4.
My version says the dread.
The dread, yeah. Chapter 4, verse 22. Now this is Jeremiah speaking. And of course you know that because you've colored it. Chapter 4 and verse 22. My people, so this is God speaking, Jeremiah is speaking, but he's speaking the thoughts of God, okay? My people are foolish. They do not know me. They are stupid children and have no understanding. They are shrewd to do evil, but to do good they do not know. What words do you see? Foolish. I'm going to add stupid to that. My children say stupid is a bad word. I say, no, it's not. God says it all the time. Stupid children. I have been tempted to say that about my children at times. I'm quite certain I have said that about my children, just not in front of my children. But God says it in front of his children. He says, Jeremiah, go preach to everybody and tell them they're stupid. Tell them they're foolish. All right? Anything else stick out to you?
They are skilled in doing evil.
Skilled in doing evil. Wise in doing evil. All right. And
says they know me not, and they have no understanding.
All right, good. Let's look at chapter 5. Verse 20. Declare this in the house of Jacob and proclaim it in Judah, saying, Hear this, O foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but do not see, who have ears but do not hear. Is that familiar language to you? Do you remember ever hearing language like that somewhere else in the scripture? Isaiah spoke like this, and Jesus, borrowing from Isaiah, spoke like this when he talked about the parables. All right? Verse 22. Do you not fear me? Do you not tremble in my presence? I have placed the sand as a boundary for the sea, an eternal decree, so it cannot cross over it. Though the waves toss, yet they cannot prevail. Though they roar, yet they cannot cross over it. Why is he talking about war? What does that have to do with anything? Why is God talking about the boundaries of the oceans?
Shows his power.
Yes.
He created it all.
All right. Look at what my power has done, and then jump back to the beginning of 22. Do you not fear me? Do you not tremble before me? Look at what my power has done. I have made it so that the oceans have boundaries that they cannot cross. Verse 23, but this people has a stubborn and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and departed. I want you to think about the significance of these ideas. God has established the boundaries of the mighty seas, and he has determined the direction that the oceans can and cannot go, but he does not have the power to change the hearts of people if they won't let him do it. You see that? You see that contrast? I've set the boundaries of the oceans. My power can do that. But let me tell you what my power can't do. I can't just overcome somebody's stubbornness. I can't overcome somebody's foolishness.
Was it more of a can't or more of a won't?
I think it's more of a can't. Well, I think it's both. I think it's both. I don't think God will just overpower someone's will and bend them, right? He wants us to willingly bow our knees, not to be forced to, right? So I don't think he will, but I think it's the idea that if you continue in this, all of this, even my power is not strong enough to change the direction that you're taking, right? Verse 24. They do not say in their heart, let us now fear the Lord our God, who gives rain in its season, both the autumn rain and the spring rain, who keeps for us the appointed weeks of the harvest. They're not even able to say, let's turn back to God. Let's change. Let's turn back to him. They're not going to do that. And so God says, you're leaving me no choice. Chapter 6, verse 19, I am bringing disaster on this people, the fruit of their plans, because they have not listened to my words, and as for my law, they have rejected it also. So there's not only, to Kyle's point, a lack of knowledge, but there's a rejection of it. There's a rejection of the things that God has said. So what is it that led to the pervasive sin of Judah? All of this stuff. All of these things. They've forsaken God. There's no fear of God. They're being foolish. They give consideration to how they can do more evil and gain advantage and do the things that they want to do. They don't have knowledge, but even if it was given to them, they would reject it anyways. So how does God feel about this? Look at chapter 3. Chapter 3 and verse 1. God says, if a husband divorces his wife and she goes from him and belongs to another man, will he still return to her? That is her first husband. Will he return to her? And the answer to the question is no, he can't do that. The law actually forbid him from doing that. Would not the land be completely polluted if he had done so? Yes, it would. This is a violation of God's law. So now, verse 1 continues, but you are a harlot with many lovers, yet you turn to me, declares the Lord. Okay, think about what this is saying. The law of Moses said, if a man divorces his wife and she goes out and marries another guy, she can't go back to her first husband. If that happened, Moses said that would be a pollution of the land. That should not happen. Don't turn there, but you can look at Deuteronomy 24 for that law. Okay? But God says, but look, Judah, that's exactly what you've done to me. You left me and you pursued other lovers. I can't take you back. Just like the law said, I can't take you back because you are playing the harlot with many lovers. And yet, you want me to take you back and bless you and let's just act like everything's fine, but I can't do that. Throughout many of the prophets, particularly Hosea, God says that unfaithfulness to him by his people is the same thing as adultery. It hurts him when his people turn away from him. And he is watching his nation do that very thing. In chapter 2, in verse 19, your own wickedness will correct you, and your apostasies will reprove you. Know therefore and see that it is evil and bitter for you to forsake the Lord your God, and the dread of me is not in you. You are forsaking God. I know we read that verse earlier, but I want to just, that word forsake, Ralph talked about that in one of his lessons during a meeting a couple of weeks ago. That is more than maybe we think of it as, right? If I say Stacy has forsaken me, I'm not saying, she went to the gym one night and forgot to leave me supper. That's not what I'm saying. The word forsake is a strong word. In chapter 5 and verse 7, God says, why should I pardon you? Your sons have forsaken me and sworn by those who are not God's. When I had fed them to the full, in other words, when I had taken care of my people and given them every blessing, they committed adultery and trooped to the harlot's house. What does your translation say there? Instead of saying they trooped to the harlot's house, does it say something else? What?
It says the same.
Trooped? Okay. I don't know if this is the idea of the Hebrew word, but when I see the word troop, I think military. And I think about a group of soldiers, a troop or a battalion of soldiers marching in line going to their destination. I don't know that that's the idea of the Hebrew word. Maybe it is. If it is, think about that image.
Mine says, they assembled themselves by troops in the harlots.
Okay, assembled themselves by troops. So maybe that is the idea of the word. That God's people are lining up, just like troops in the military, marching, except this time instead of carrying out their orders, they're marching to unfaithfulness to God.
There's a certain resoluteness to that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, a willfulness to it, right? Okay, verse 8. This verse is always just, it's very, very vivid. They were well-fed, lusty horses, each one neighing after his neighbor's wife. Alan, the word that you just used, what was it? Resoluteness. Yeah, okay. So just like this stallion who is in heat, he is seeking a mare, and he is intent. And God says, that's what my people are like when they're pursuing idolatry. That image is just very, very strong, very vivid. Look at chapter 2 and verse 5. Thus says the Lord, what injustice did your fathers find in me, that they went far from me, and walked after emptiness, and became empty? I love that last expression. They went after worthlessness, and they themselves became worthless. We reap what we sow. Isn't that what that expression is saying? If we pursue empty things, we're going to come up empty. If we pursue worthless things, we will become worthless ourselves. We reap what we sow. What we take in is what comes out, right? How many ways can we talk about this? So I want to give you a thought question with that idea. Pursuing emptiness and coming up empty. Do you think that people today do the same thing? And if so, how does that manifest itself? How do people today pursue worthless things and then become worthless themselves? How have we seen that in life? Sorry?
Gambling.
Okay, gambling. The kinds of vices that are in the self-control category, right? Or lack of self-control. Someone pursues the rush of gambling, the excitement, the intensity, and even though he knows he's going to lose what he's got, he's going to lose everything he's got. The odds are stacked against him, but he still can't resist the urge, right? Okay, that's good. Good example. What else? How so? Oh, drugs. I'm sorry. I thought you said job. Drugs. Okay. All right. Good. Yeah, and same kind of thing, right? That's the same vice that's in the self-control or lack thereof category, and we could probably multiply vices in that regard. Pornography is another one that really comes to mind that is just absolutely pervasive in our world today. There are mostly men, not exclusively, but mostly men have pursued this kind of digital relationship with this person on the screen, and it ends up having an effect on their actual human relationships with people that they know, right? So men who are just completely given over to pornography, they experience distancing from their wife, and they can't perform in the bedroom and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's recorded. It's going on YouTube. You pursue emptiness, you come up empty. All right? Okay. Are there other areas of life, though, where this principle would still apply? Let's move away from the vices. Because we could talk a lot about more, but are there other things in life that could be empty that lead to emptiness? So Sandy, go ahead.
Like when he said, I thought he said jobs too.
Okay.
That could be it, somebody just, ignoring their family and just keep trying for the power.
Okay, good. Yeah, so
And then they're left with nothing.
a job, a career, is not in and of itself a vice or something that's just inherently bad. But it is something that, if not kept in check, could become that, right? Okay, good. Kyle, you had your hand up?
I was going to say similar, and if your focus in your career is all about making more money, that becomes a very empty pursuit. If that's what you're pursuing, you're never going to reach any kind of satisfaction or fullness in that, because
Yeah.
there's always
Good. I hope you're connecting some dots maybe, or at least thinking about the book of Ecclesiastes, right? I mean, that's what Ecclesiastes is all about. Solomon said, look, I've tried everything. I've tried to find satisfaction and fulfillment in all these different areas of life. I kept coming up empty, and that's why the word vanity is used so many times in the book. chapter 2, look at verse 9. Therefore I will contend with you, declares the Lord, and contend with your sons' sons. For cross the coastlands of Kittim and see, and send to Kedar and observe closely, and see if there has ever been such a thing as this. Travel to these distant lands and see if you can find there what you can find here. He's leading up to something with this, all right? So he's kind of like issuing a challenge. Travel the world and see if you can find in other places what you see in Judah. Well, what do you see? Verse 11. Has a nation changed gods when they were not gods? Have you ever seen a nation change its deities that it worships? Not really. I mean, they might add some, right? You know, the Greeks were like, hey, there's always room for more.
Yep.
Throw up another temple over there. We got space, you know. But the Greeks didn't just totally abandon the gods of their myths and their stories. And the Romans were the same way. And you can go throughout history and see every nation of people that's ever existed has a religious story about how their people came to be and all of that. You know, with the Romans, it was Romulus and Remus, and you know, the Greeks had their mythological stories about how the world came about and how they came to be. All of these things, well, that meant something to them. That's a part of their heritage, right? That's a part of who they are as a people. And so God says, travel the world, look and see if other people have done what my people have done. My people have changed or exchanged their glory for that which does not profit. Think about that expression. My people have exchanged their glory for that which was worthless. What is he talking about when he says, my people have exchanged they've given away their glory? What do you think he's talking about?
What verse was that?
Verse 11, chapter 2. My people have exchanged their glory for that which does not profit. I think he's talking about himself.
Well, glory's capitalized.
Oh, that sells it, doesn't it? All right. Sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes it's not, because the translators decide if it should be capitalized or not. There's nothing in the text itself, the ancient text, that says capital G, right? So the translators are interpreting what they think the verse is saying. Oh, the glory is God, let's capitalize it. I think they're right, incidentally. But that's a translator's decision. They capitalize it because they, and I agree with them, believe that the glory that Israel exchanged was God himself. And I say that because of what it says at the beginning of verse 11. Has a nation changed its gods? And the point that he's making is that's exactly what my people have done. They've changed their gods. They left me and they went to idols. They went to false gods. But he's the glory of Judah, and they gave it up. Bill?
I think about Psalms 115. The opening verses of that chapter speak extensively about idolatry. And it goes on to say that they that make them become like them.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Pursuing the empty and becoming empty themselves, like we talked about a moment ago. That's it. I hadn't thought about that verse. That's good. Now look at verse 13. My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. That's a graphic kind of a way of saying what we've been saying all along. They pushed God out. They forsaken him, who was this source of living water. And they said, we don't need that. We can make water for ourselves. And so they've hewn out cisterns, and they've made these, and of course cisterns, that was a real thing in the ancient world. That's how they collected water. And they said, we don't need the water that comes from God. We don't need God's blessing upon us. We can provide for ourselves. And they came up empty in that effort. All right. I'm going to skip over question number 5, but if you haven't done it, I would like for you to look through those verses and just look at the specific sins that are mentioned. I want to go to question number 6. Also chapter 6. Chapter 6 and verse 15. The question asks, how did Judah feel about her sin? Were they ashamed because of the abominations that they had done? They were not ashamed at all. They didn't even know how to blush. Why do people blush? They're embarrassed. They find themselves in a situation that they weren't expecting or whatever. Things get turned around and they're embarrassed. Or people blush. People become embarrassed, as this verse says, because they're ashamed of themselves. God says there's no shame among my people anymore. People go out and murder and rape and pillage and plunder and lie, and nobody has any feeling about it. It's like it's not a big deal. It doesn't even matter. Does that verse not describe America today? I am embarrassed and ashamed for our country. And I'm not even the one guilty of all this foolishness. And it's humiliating. And I think, what do people in the world think about our society right now? Not that that's the most important consideration. What does God think about American society is the most important consideration. But we should be ashamed of ourselves for the things that we're doing as a nation. And yet, every day, it seems like we just become more and more callous and just blasé about all these things that are going on. Well, that's not a new thing. God has seen this before. All right, let me close with this. Look at chapter 5 and verse 18. This is one of the beautiful things about the person and the character of God. In chapter 5 and verse 18, he's just talked about how the judgment is going to come. He started talking about that in verse 14. I am bringing a nation, verse 15, against you. You're going to fall, you're going to fall, you're going to fall. Yet, verse 18, yet even in those days, declares the Lord, I will not make you a complete destruction. I'm not going to destroy everybody. So even in this judgment that he's bringing, God is already saying there's going to be enough mercy for those who want it. All right? And we'll talk about that in a future lesson. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Nothing to prepare for Sunday. I've got a follow-up to this. Thank you.